The moment Sandra spoke and Keanu froze. The premiere night was supposed to be like every other Hollywood evening, filled with bright lights, red carpets, and the quiet pressure to smile even when the world felt heavy. But this night carried something different in the air, something unseen, something waiting. It was the kind of night where people sensed a storm inside someone's heart even before it formed into words. And as Sandra Bullock stepped out of the black car and onto the carpet, the warm lights from the cameras washed over her face, revealing a calm expression that hid 1,000 unsaid things. The photographers were calling her name, the fans were cheering, but her eyes were searching for one person. She didn't say anything yet. She just kept breathing slowly, as if she was preparing for something she had feared and hoped for at the same time. Keanu Reeves arrived only a minute after her, but that 1 minute carried a weight that only time between two souls can hold. He walked with his usual quiet grace, the kind that everyone admired but never fully understood. He looked peaceful, yet his heart was beating louder than the voices around him. He wasn't nervous about the movie or the interviews. He was nervous about Sandra. Something inside him knew that tonight wasn't like any other night they had lived through, and he felt it the moment he saw her standing at the far end of the carpet. She wasn't smiling like she normally did. She wasn't pretending to be light. Instead, she looked like someone who had made a decision, one that might change everything. The crowd noticed it too. Fans whispered to each other about how both of them looked emotional in a way that didn't match the event. The energy in the air shifted, the way the sky changes right before rain. And while everyone was watching them for entertainment, no one knew that a real story, a deeply personal one, was preparing to unfold right in front of them. A story that had been waiting for years. When Keanu finally walked toward her, he slowed down without even realizing it. It wasn't hesitation. It was respect. Respect for whatever she was going through, respect for the space between them, respect for the history that tied their names together in a way no one else could understand. He gave her a soft, careful smile, the kind of smile that asked, "Are you all right?" without saying it. And Sandra responded with a breath that shook slightly, a sign that something inside her had been building for too long. She tried to smile back, but the smile trembled as if it was carrying a truth she could no longer hide. When they moved to greet the fans, something unexpected happened. A small group of fans asked them to speak together for a moment, something simple, something sweet. But when Sandra took the microphone, her voice didn't sound like her usual playful tone. Instead, her voice cracked softly, just enough for Keanu to look at her with concern. She didn't plan what she said next. She didn't rehearse anything. She just allowed her heart to speak in front of hundreds of flashing lights and thousands of viewers watching live. She said, "Sometimes you save someone without even knowing it, and sometimes that person stands right beside you for years without understanding how deep it goes." Her voice shook on the last word, and the entire carpet froze. Cameras stopped moving, fans stopped speaking, even the security guards turned to listen. It was the kind of silence that only truth can create, the kind that reaches people before they even know why. Keanu felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that Sandra was revealing something raw, something that she had held inside for a very long time. He didn't know where she was going with her words, but he didn't interrupt her. He simply stepped closer, just enough to make her feel supported without crossing the invisible emotional line she was standing on. Sandra noticed. She felt the warmth of his presence, and it steadied her in a way that surprised even her. She continued speaking, her voice low and emotional, saying that life had thrown storms at her, storms no one ever saw, storms she hid behind jokes and strong smiles. She said there were days she didn't know if she could hold everything together, days when she felt alone even in crowded rooms. And then she said his name. Quietly, softly. She said, "Keanu has been the one constant light in my dark days. He doesn't even know how much he helped me just by being himself." The crowd gasped. Fans covered their mouths. Reporters leaned forward as if they didn't want to miss a single word. But no one reacted stronger than Keanu. His eyes softened instantly, his shoulders lowered, and for a moment he forgot about the cameras. He looked at Sandra with a level of care that made people stop breathing. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just listened, and somehow that made everything she said even heavier, even more meaningful. Sandra's voice grew unsteady as she explained how his kindness, his humility, and his gentle strength had been her safe place for years. She wasn't talking about romance. She was talking about something deeper, something spiritual, something built from unspoken understanding. And as she spoke, her emotions finally spilled through her eyes. Tears formed but didn't fall, creating a shimmer under the bright premiere lights. Keanu wanted to reach out. He wanted to offer comfort, but he respected her space. He respected her vulnerability, and that quiet restraint made the moment even more powerful. People watching felt their hearts squeeze because they could see that Keanu was holding back his own emotions, trying not to overwhelm her when she was already standing in such a delicate place. But then something unexpected happened. Sandra's breath broke not from sadness but from bravery. She whispered, "I never said thank you properly, not once, but you saved me. You truly did." Her voice cracked again, but this time Keanu stepped slightly closer, not enough to touch her, but enough to let her know he was right there. And then, just as the world was leaning in, waiting for his response, the host of the premiere called them to move inside for the interviews. The moment was interrupted, cut in half, unfinished. Sandra froze, unsure if she should continue. Keanu looked at her, torn between respecting the schedule and honoring the moment she had offered with her whole heart. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, but he didn't get the chance. The host's voice grew louder, pushing them forward, and the crowd started shifting around them. Sandra felt her courage slip away. Keanu felt something heavy settle in his chest. The moment they needed suddenly became the moment they lost. And as they walked toward the entrance, the emotional tension between them grew thicker, deeper, and more urgent than before. Keanu kept looking at Sandra, waiting for a chance to finish what had begun. Sandra kept her eyes down, afraid of what she might see if she looked at him again. Then, at the door of the premiere hall, Keanu leaned close and whispered something only she could hear. But before the audience can hear what he said, the scene ends. The whisper that changed everything. As they stepped toward the entrance of the premiere hall, the noise around them swelled again, but inside Sandra's ears everything softened until it felt like the world was moving underwater. People were talking, cameras were flashing, staff members were guiding them forward, yet none of it reached her fully. Her mind was still caught in the moment she had just created out on the carpet, the moment that came from a place so deep inside her that she didn't know she had the strength to say it out loud. She felt exposed, fragile, and strangely relieved all at once. But before she could gather herself, Keanu leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear the words he needed to say, words shaped by a mixture of gratitude, surprise, and a long, heavy truth he had carried for years. He whispered, "I didn't know you were hurting that much, and I'm sorry I didn't see it." His voice held warmth, guilt, and something more, something that made her heart grip tight inside her chest. The words didn't land lightly. They struck the part of her that had been silent for too long. She felt her breath hitch, not from sadness, but from the sudden realization that he genuinely cared in a way that wasn't performative or polite. His whisper was sincere, raw, and filled with a kind of empathy that almost brought her to tears right there in the hallway. Before she could respond, a staff member guided them toward a small room where they were supposed to wait before the live interviews began. The door closed behind them, muting the loudness of the outside world, leaving them in a more private space filled with soft lighting, quiet music, and the heavy air of unfinished words. Sandra walked a few steps forward, trying to steady her breathing. Keanu stayed a short distance behind her, not wanting to overwhelm her with his presence, but unable to walk away either. He watched her shoulders rise and fall as she inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. He felt an intense urge to help, but he also knew that pressure, even in the form of kindness, could sometimes break someone instead of supporting them. Finally, Sandra turned around slowly, her eyes still wet but more steady. She wasn't trying to hide her emotions anymore. She had already opened the door to her truth, and there was no point in closing it again. She said softly, "I didn't mean to say all of that out loud. It just happened." Her voice trembled, not with regret, but with uncertainty about how he would truly respond now that the world had heard her confession. Keanu took a slow breath before he answered. His expression was gentle, thoughtful, almost protective. "Sometimes the truth comes out when the heart is tired of holding it inside," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Those words felt like a soft blanket around her fears, but they also made her emotions rise again. She looked at him closely, searching for signs of discomfort or distance. Instead, she found sincerity, the same quiet sincerity that had always defined him. But this time it felt heavier, deeper, as if something inside him had shifted the moment she spoke her heart on the carpet. She took a step toward him, slowly, carefully, watching his reaction. He didn't move away. He didn't stiffen. He simply breathed in, waited, and allowed her presence to come closer. "You didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because I didn't let you know, I didn't let anyone know." She paused, pressing her fingers together nervously. "I didn't want to be a burden." Keanu's expression tightened, not with anger, but with a deep ache. He shook his head slightly. "You could never be a burden, Sandra, never." He emphasized the last word gently, but it landed with a force that made her chest warm and heavy. She didn't expect him to respond like that. She didn't expect him to feel so deeply about something she had kept silent for so long. Before she could reply, someone knocked on the door. A production assistant reminded them that they had 3 minutes before going live for the interviews. The interruption created a wave of tension between them, but also a strange urgency. The time they needed was slipping away again. Sandra looked toward the doorway, then back at Keanu, torn between the responsibility of the premiere and the emotional moment she didn't want to lose. Keanu noticed her hesitation and stepped closer, lowering his voice once more. "There's more I want to say," he said softly, "but not here, not like this." Sandra felt her heart jump. The tone in his voice was different now, carrying weight, carrying intention. Something inside her shifted, a mixture of hope and fear rising together. "Is it something bad?" she asked quietly. Keanu's gaze softened further and he shook his head gently. "No, it's something honest." The word honest lingered in the air between them like a fragile glass ornament, glowing softly but capable of breaking with the slightest pressure. The assistant called them again, pulling them toward the stage lights. Sandra hesitated as she reached for the door handle. Her fingers paused, her chest tightening with a new question she wasn't sure she had the courage to ask. But the uncertainty grew heavier by the second, and she finally whispered, "Am I going to regret saying what I said out there?" It was a question rooted in fear, vulnerability, and the desire to be seen without being rejected. Keanu stepped even closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence without him touching her. "No," he whispered softly. "You're going to be grateful you said it, because it opened a door I should have opened a long time ago." The meaning behind his words hit her like a gentle wave, not painful, but overwhelming in its depth. Sandra's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening slightly as she tried to understand what door he was talking about. But she didn't get to ask, because the assistant opened the door fully and signaled for them to walk out. The lights from the stage spilled into the room, washing over them with bright intensity. They walked side by side toward the interview area, but neither of them felt steady. Sandra felt like she was walking into a place where her entire world might shift again. Keanu felt like he was holding onto something he could no longer hide. The emotions between them grew thicker by the moment, as if the air itself carried the weight of everything unsaid. When they finally sat down in the chairs for the live interview, the host greeted them with enthusiasm. The cameras pointed straight at their faces, capturing every tiny movement. Sandra placed her hands in her lap, trying to stop them from shaking. Keanu sat upright, his expression calm but his eyes unusually focused, almost as if he was preparing himself for something. Then the host smiled and said, "So everyone heard what Sandra said on the carpet. It was powerful. Keanu, how do you feel about it?" The question dropped like a stone in a silent lake, sending ripples through the room, through Sandra's chest, and through Keanu's mind. He inhaled deeply, preparing to speak. And just as he opened his mouth to answer, something unexpected happened behind the cameras, something that made Sandra gasp softly and made Keanu's eyes widen with shock. The twist begins the voice that stopped everything. The moment Keanu opened his mouth to answer the host's question, something unexpected echoed across the room. It wasn't noise from the audience, and it wasn't a mistake from the sound system. It was a voice. A trembling voice filled with emotion, soft but powerful enough to cut through the bright lights and tense silence. Everyone turned toward the direction it came from, and Sandra felt her chest tighten as the reality of the moment sank in. The voice belonged to someone who had been standing quietly among the crew, someone no one even noticed until she spoke. The woman looked fragile, like someone who had walked through a long storm before arriving at this very place. She had tears in her eyes, and her hands were shaking slightly as if she had tried to hold her emotions back for too long. Her voice carried a trembling honesty that didn't belong to the noise of Hollywood, but belonged to real life, raw and unfiltered. She said, "Keanu, you don't know me, but you saved me too." The words fell heavy into the room, creating an immediate hush that tightened the air around them. It was as if the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. Keanu froze. Sandra's heart pounded so hard she could feel the pulse in her palms. The host looked caught off guard, unsure whether to stop the woman or let her continue. But no one stopped her. Something about the way she stood there, something about the way her voice shook with a mixture of pain and gratitude, made everyone know this moment was real and important. She stepped forward carefully, her eyes locked on Keanu with a vulnerability that felt almost too heavy to watch. She continued, her voice cracking, Years ago, when I had nothing, when I was ready to give up, you said something in an interview, just a small sentence. You said, be gentle with yourself. And I listened to it every day until it felt like I could breathe again. Her breath trembled as she wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed but determined to speak. I didn't come here to interrupt anything. I heard what Sandra said about you, and I needed to tell you that she's not the only one. You saved more people than you know. The room fell silent in a way that didn't feel like shock but felt like a collective exhale of emotion. Keanu's eyes softened, and for a moment he didn't look like a Hollywood star. He looked like a man standing face to face with a truth he never expected to hear. He leaned slightly forward in his chair, gently, slowly, as if approaching a scared bird. His voice grew softer than the room expected. Thank you, he said, and those two words carried a depth that made the sound crew lower their heads, trying to hold onto their own emotions. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you heard something that helped you. The woman nodded, her tears falling freely now. I did, and hearing Sandra tonight, it made me brave enough to speak too. She glanced toward Sandra with gratitude and then back at Keanu with a kind of fragile courage that moved everyone. Then she whispered, Thank you for being you. After saying that, she stepped back, her body shaking slightly as if a weight had just been lifted off her shoulders. Security moved gently toward her, not to remove her, but to offer support because it was clear she wasn't trying to cause trouble. She simply needed to be heard. Keanu remained still for a long moment, breathing slowly as he processed the intensity of what had just happened. His chest rose and fell with a quiet heaviness, the kind that only comes when someone realizes the impact they unknowingly had on another life. Sandra watched him with new eyes, her heart swelling with both pain and admiration. She knew Keanu was humble. She knew he never saw himself as anything more than a man trying to be kind in a world that wasn't always kind back. But watching him absorb someone's gratitude with such tenderness made her see him differently, deeper, more profoundly than before. The host, still overwhelmed, leaned forward and said gently, Keanu, I think you were about to answer my question before this moment happened. He spoke carefully, not wanting to break the fragile emotional energy in the room. Everyone looked at Keanu again, waiting. Sandra held her breath, her hands curling slowly together in her lap as she prepared herself for whatever was coming next. Keanu looked down for a moment, his eyes soft, his thoughts heavy. Then he lifted his gaze toward Sandra, not the host, not the cameras, but directly at her. The look in his eyes was deep and vulnerable, filled with something he had held back for years. The world around them seemed to fade into a soft blur as he finally spoke. What she said on the carpet meant more than she knows, he began, his voice steady but emotionally rich. And it's true that I didn't know how much she was hurting, but I did know she was carrying something. I always knew. Sandra's breath caught. He continued, and I wish I had been the one to make her feel safe enough to talk about it earlier, because she has always been someone I care about deeply, even when we didn't have the words to explain it. The host blinked, surprised. Sandra felt her heart sink and lift at the same time. Keanu wasn't reading a script. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was speaking the truth he had kept tucked away for too long. His voice grew softer, almost trembling. When Sandra said I saved her, she didn't know that she saved me too. She brought light into moments of my life that were darker than anyone realized. The entire audience leaned in closer. Fans in the studio were clutching tissues. Members of the crew tried not to let their emotions show on camera. Keanu exhaled slowly. I didn't respond earlier because I didn't want to say something that would overwhelm her. But now, I want her to know that she was never alone. Not then, not now. Sandra felt her breath tremble, her throat tightened. She felt exposed, seen, and comforted all at once. She opened her mouth slightly to respond, but before she could speak, the host asked, And Keanu, what is it that you said you needed to tell her? The thing you said you should have opened a long time ago. Keanu froze for half a second, not because he didn't want to answer, but because he knew that saying it now would change everything. The cameras zoomed closer. The lights felt brighter. Sandra's heartbeat drummed so loudly inside her chest she could feel it in her fingertips. She looked at him, silently telling him she was ready to hear his truth, no matter what it was. He inhaled deeply, but before he could speak, a sudden sound erupted from backstage. A loud crash, a shout, then another voice calling Sandra's name urgently. She turned sharply, her eyes widening. Keanu's head snapped toward the noise, worry flooding his expression. The moment shattered. The truth was delayed again. And what happened next pulled them into a new emotional storm. They never expected the sudden collapse behind the stage. The loud crash behind the stage cut through the air so sharply that every conversation, every camera movement, and every quiet breath in the room stopped all at once. Sandra felt the shock hit her body like a cold wave. Keanu immediately straightened in his chair, his calm expression shifting into one of deep concern. The host froze mid-sentence, turning toward the source of the noise as backstage crew members rushed toward the area where the voice had called Sandra's name. The audience murmured anxiously, but no one dared move until someone understood what was happening. Sandra stood slowly, her legs trembling as a strange mixture of fear and instinct pushed her forward. Something inside her knew it wasn't a simple accident. The tone in the voice that had shouted her name was urgent, pulling her heart in a direction she couldn't ignore. Keanu rose the moment she did, staying close without touching her, as if ready to step in the moment she needed him. His protective presence wrapped around the moment like a soft shield. The cameras continued rolling, but the event no longer felt like a premiere. It felt like a real human crisis unfolding live, and no one knew what was waiting on the other side of the curtain. When Sandra reached the entrance to the backstage area, a production assistant rushed toward her, breathing heavily. "Sandra, it's someone who asked to speak to you earlier. She said it was important," the assistant said, her voice shaking. She collapsed. Sandra's stomach dropped. She didn't know who it could be, but the idea that someone had been trying to reach her and fell before getting the chance created a sharp ache in her chest. She moved faster, her breath unsteady, her heart beating against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Keanu followed close behind, his concern growing with every step she took. As they stepped behind the heavy curtain, the noise from the stage faded instantly, replaced by a tense, heavy silence broken only by urgent whispers from the crew and the faint sound of someone crying. Sandra's eyes scanned the dim space until she saw a woman sitting on the floor, supported by two crew members. It was the same woman who had spoken earlier, the trembling woman who had confessed that Keanu's words once saved her life. But now she looked pale, weak, and breathless, as if the act of speaking in front of everyone had drained the last of her strength. Sandra hurried toward her, her eyes widening with fear and compassion. "Oh no, are you all right?" she said gently, kneeling beside the woman without hesitation. The woman looked up at her with tearful, exhausted eyes and shook her head slightly. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just needed to tell you both." Her breath hitched as she tried to sit up straighter, but Sandra immediately placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. The contact made the woman release a soft sob, as if kindness alone was enough to make her break. Keanu crouched beside them, his gaze soft but filled with worry. "Hey, you're safe. Slow down, breathe first," he said in a calm, comforting tone. He wasn't performing, he wasn't trying to soothe for the cameras. He was simply a man trying to help someone in pain. The woman wiped her face with the back of her trembling hand. "I didn't expect to fall. I just felt lightheaded after speaking. I think the emotions were too much." She gave a faint, embarrassed smile. "I've never talked in front of that many people before." Sandra placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were brave. What you said mattered," she whispered. The woman nodded, her tears reflecting the dim backstage lights. "I wanted to tell you something else, something important," she said quietly, struggling to find her breath. Sandra exchanged a worried glance with Keanu. There was something fragile and urgent in the woman's voice, something that felt like a key to a deeper part of the night. Sandra leaned closer. "Go ahead, I'm listening," she said softly. The woman's breathing grew slower and her voice thinned. "I didn't come alone. I brought someone with me, someone who knows you." Sandra blinked in surprise, her eyebrows slowly pulling together as confusion mixed with concern. "Knows me? How?" she asked. The woman's lips trembled as she whispered. "She waited outside because she was scared to come in. But she wanted to see you. She said she didn't want to disturb anything, but she needed to be here tonight." Keanu looked at Sandra, watching her reaction carefully. Sandra felt a strange, emotional heaviness settle in her chest, the kind that comes when the past suddenly steps into the present. "Who is she?" Sandra asked gently. The woman's hand trembled as she pointed toward the side exit door. "Your sister," she whispered weakly. "She said she couldn't tell you herself. She asked me to help her." Sandra froze, her entire body going still as the words hit her like a sudden gust of wind. Her throat tightened painfully, and her breath came out in a small, broken sound. My sister," she whispered in disbelief. Her heart began to race not with fear, but with a deep, unresolved ache she had buried years ago. Keanu's eyes widened, his concern shifting from the woman to Sandra instantly. He knew the complicated history Sandra had with her family. He knew the painful distance, the unanswered questions, the silence that stretched across years. He also knew how deeply it affected her, even when she pretended it didn't. The woman nodded slowly, her hand trembling as she held onto Sandra's wrist. She's been waiting outside for more than an hour. She didn't know how to approach you. She was scared you wouldn't want to see her. But when she heard the words you said tonight, she said she had to try. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't blink them away. Her entire chest tightened with a mix of shock, longing, and old wounds rising to the surface. I haven't seen her in years, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why would she come now? The woman took a shaky breath. Because she said she misses you and she's sorry for everything. Sandra covered her mouth as her tears spilled over. Keanu moved closer, placing a steadying hand on her back, offering silent support without crowding her. She leaned into his presence slightly, not for comfort but for grounding. Her world felt unstable again, shifting under her feet in ways she didn't expect. The woman's eyes fluttered as exhaustion overtook her. Please go see her, she whispered weakly. The crew gently helped her lie down as the medical staff arrived. Sandra stood slowly, her legs shaky but determined. Keanu rose with her, never stepping more than a pace away. Do you want me to go with you? He asked softly. Sandra swallowed hard, wiping her tears as she tried to breathe normally. I don't know, she whispered honestly. I'm scared. Keanu nodded gently. Then you shouldn't go alone. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. Keanu, what if she hates me? Her voice cracked as old wounds resurfaced. Keanu shook his head gently. She came here, Sandra. People don't cross cities, fears, and memories to hate someone. She came because she wants to mend something, and you deserve that. Sandra inhaled shakily, nodding as tears continued to fall. Keanu extended his hand, not touching her, just offering. She hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling fingers into his. Their hands closed together slowly, naturally, as if this was the moment they had both been walking toward all night. But as they took their first step toward the side exit where Sandra's sister waited, a member of the security team ran toward them, breathing hard. Sandra, wait, there's a problem, he said urgently. The next revelation was moments away, and it would change everything again, the truth waiting outside the door. The security guard's voice carried the kind of urgency that made Sandra's breath stop halfway in her chest. Keanu instinctively shifted closer to her, not touching her but creating a protective presence around her trembling uncertainty. Sandra tightened her grip on his hand, her pulse racing as fear, confusion, and hope all collided inside her at the same time. She looked at the guard with wide, teary eyes, her voice fragile when she spoke. What problem? She whispered, as if afraid the answer might break something already fragile inside her. The guard took a deep breath, his expression serious but gentle. The woman outside, the one who said she's your sister, she didn't come alone, and the situation changed a few minutes ago. Sandra's stomach tightened painfully. She felt Keanu's fingers curl slightly around hers, grounding her. She steadied her breath, though her heart felt like it was beating faster with every second. What do you mean? She whispered again, almost pleading for clarity. The guard looked at her with caution, as if picking his words carefully. She's in a very emotional state. She's been crying. She keeps saying she needs to talk to you tonight, not tomorrow, not later, tonight. He paused, then added, and she said she won't leave until she does. Sandra felt her knees weaken. She had built walls around that part of her life for so long that she didn't know how to face them being pushed open all at once. Keanu stepped closer, gently placing his free hand on her upper arm, grounding her even more. The warmth and steadiness in his touch made her exhale shakily. Is she alone now? Keanu asked. The guard hesitated. No, she brought someone with her, a young girl. She looks about 12 or 13. The words hit Sandra like a sudden burst of cold air. She blinked rapidly, her heart stumbling inside her chest. A girl, she whispered. Who? Why would she? Her voice faded as her mind started racing, trying to fill in the blank spaces of a story she didn't even know existed. The guard nodded slowly. The girl keeps asking for you too. She says she wants to meet you. Sandra's breath caught. Her hands began trembling uncontrollably. Keanu watched her face closely, his eyes filled with concern. He shifted his thumb gently across her hand, silently telling her she wasn't alone. Sandra, he said softly, take a breath. I'm right here. She tried to inhale deeply, but the breath came out broken, filled with confusion and a rising wave of emotion she struggled to contain. Why would a child want to meet me? She whispered to herself, her voice cracking. I don't understand. The guard stepped closer carefully. Sandra, there's more. Her heart sank. Please, she whispered, just tell me. The guard continued. The girl, she looks like you, and the woman said there's a reason for that. Sandra felt her entire world tilt. Her breath vanished. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Keanu reached for her waist gently, catching her before she could stumble. Sandra grabbed onto him, her fingers digging slightly into his jacket as she tried to process the words. She looks like me, she repeated in a shaking whisper. How, why, what does she mean? The guard lowered his voice. The woman said the girl is family. Sandra's eyes widened in shock, tears filling them instantly. Her voice broke as she whispered, No, no, that can't be, I don't have. But she couldn't finish the sentence. Her breath collapsed. Her heart pounded painfully inside her chest as the possibility rose like a storm inside her mind. Keanu gently guided her back a step, helping her steady herself. Sandra, look at me, he whispered. She lifted her eyes slowly, her vision blurred by tears. I don't understand, she whispered helplessly. Why would she come here with a child? Why would she say something like that? What if it's not true? What if it is true? I don't know which one scares me more. Her emotional vulnerability slipped through every word, and Keanu felt his own chest tighten from seeing how shaken she was. He spoke gently, steadying his voice for her sake. We won't jump to conclusions, we'll listen. We'll understand what she needs to say, and you won't face any of it alone. His words softened her trembling heart, but they didn't erase the fear. Instead, they gave her a small piece of strength to hold onto. The guard continued, his tone softer now. She said she wanted to explain everything to you privately, but when we tried to guide her to the waiting area, she refused to move. She kept saying she needed to speak to you directly. She said she made mistakes a long time ago, and she wants to make things right. Sandra closed her eyes tightly as tears slid down her cheeks. Old pain pressed against her ribs, memories of childhood arguments, broken trust, distance, and lost connection rising inside her. And the girl, Sandra whispered, her voice thin and shaking. The guard's tone softened further. She asked, Is she my aunt? Sandra's knees buckled again, and Keanu held her more firmly, pulling her gently into his arms for support. She leaned into him, unable to pretend she was strong enough to stand on her own at that moment. Her heart felt like it was breaking open in ways she never prepared for. Keanu whispered against her hair, Breathe, Sandra, breathe. Whatever this is, we'll understand it together. His voice was warm, steady, an anchor in the chaos swirling around her. Her body trembled as she inhaled shakily. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know she had a child. I didn't know anything. She left. She disappeared. I thought she wanted distance from me forever. Keanu stroked her back gently, grounding her. Maybe she didn't want distance. Maybe she was scared. People run when they're scared. Sandra lifted her tear-filled eyes toward the guard. Where is she now? She whispered. The guard motioned toward the side exit. She's waiting just outside. She asked us not to bring her in until you were ready. Sandra wiped her face with trembling hands. I'm not ready, she whispered, but I have to go. Keanu nodded softly. I'll walk with you every step. They moved slowly toward the exit door. Sandra's heart thundered inside her chest, each beat heavy with fear, longing, confusion, and a hope she didn't dare admit yet. Keanu walked beside her, steady and silent, his presence offering the strength she didn't have alone. When they reached the door, Sandra paused, her hand hovering over the handle. What if she hates me? Sandra whispered. What if she came to blame me for everything? What if the girl doesn't want anything to do with me? Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice to a soft whisper beside her ear. Sandra, if she hated you, she wouldn't be here. People don't come to fix things they don't care about. She came because she wants something healed. Sandra swallowed hard, tears slipping again. And what if I'm not enough for her to forgive? Keanu's expression softened into something deeply loving, although he didn't say the words out loud. Instead, he lifted her hand gently and whispered, You are more than enough. You always were. The words hit her heart with such tenderness that she let out a broken breath. She looked at the door again, feeling the weight of everything pressing against her chest. She reached for the handle. And just as her fingers touched it, the door slowly began to open from the other side. The face waiting on the other side would change everything. The voice that followed would break open the deepest part of Sandra's past. The revelation was seconds away, the door that opened the past, and the truth that healed the present. The door opened slowly, as if even the hinges understood the weight of the moment. The hallway outside was quieter than the rest of the premiere, lit only by soft overhead lights that made everything feel more intimate, more fragile. Sandra held her breath as the door creaked wider, her fingers tightening around Keanu's hand until her knuckles trembled. She wasn't ready for what she might see, but her heart was pulling her forward all the same, urging her to step into whatever truth waited on the other side. When the door opened fully, Sandra saw a woman standing there, breathing shakily, her eyes red from crying but filled with a longing that pierced straight through Sandra's chest. It was her sister. Older, tired, changed by life in ways Sandra didn't expect, but unmistakably her. The same curve in the jawline, the same eyes, though now soft with regret. The moment their eyes met, Sandra felt something inside her collapse and rebuild at the same time. Her sister whispered, "Hi, Sandy," using the childhood nickname Sandra hadn't heard in years. The sound of it was like a key turning in a long-locked door inside her heart. Sandra's knees shook and she swallowed hard, her voice cracking as she said, I didn't think I would ever see you again." Her sister's lips trembled before she whispered, "I didn't think I would ever be brave enough to come." They stared at each other for a long moment, an entire history of broken pieces floating between them. Words never spoken, misunderstandings never cleared, hurts never healed. Keanu stayed beside Sandra, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just steady, just present. Then a soft voice broke through the silence. "Are you my aunt?" Sandra looked down quickly, tears spilling faster as she saw the young girl standing slightly behind her sister, peeking out shyly. She was small, with eyes that looked both hopeful and scared, and features so familiar that Sandra felt her heart squeeze painfully. It was like looking into a younger version of her own childhood reflection. She didn't need confirmation. The truth was written all over the girl's face. Sandra dropped into a crouch slowly, her hands trembling as she wiped her cheeks. "Hi there," she whispered, her voice shaking but warm. The girl stepped closer hesitantly, her fingers gripping her sweater. "My name's Lily," she said softly. "Mom told me you're my Aunt Sandy." Hearing the nickname again made Sandra's breath break in her throat. She nodded gently. Yes, I am." Lily stared at her for a moment, her eyes searching Sandra's face with a kind of innocence that held more courage than most adults had. "I saw you on TV once," she whispered, "and I always wondered if you were nice in real life too." The words made Sandra cry harder, not because of sadness, but because of the sweetness in them. She reached out a trembling hand, waiting without pressure. Lily stepped forward and placed her small hand into Sandra's palm. The moment their hands touched, something inside Sandra healed, something she didn't know still needed healing. Her sister covered her mouth, crying silently as she watched them. Sandra looked up through her tears, meeting her sister's eyes, and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me you had a child?" Her sister shook her head slowly, tears flowing freely. "Because I thought you hated me," she whispered back. "I thought after everything that happened between us you would never want to see me again. I made mistakes. I walked away when I shouldn't have, and the guilt kept getting bigger. I didn't know how to come back." Sandra's heart broke and healed again in the same moment. "I never hated you," she whispered. "I just didn't understand why you left." Her sister closed her eyes tightly, her voice trembling. "I left because I was scared. I wasn't strong like you. I didn't know how to handle life the way you did. I felt like a failure. And then Lily came, and I wanted to be better for her, but I still felt too ashamed to come back to you." Sandra stood slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I would have helped you," she whispered softly. "I would have stood by you." Her sister nodded, sobbing. "I know that now. I just didn't know how to believe it before." They stared at each other for a long, heavy moment. Then her sister took a shaky step forward and whispered, "I'm sorry, Sandy. I'm so sorry." Sandra's chest broke open with years of quiet sorrow, and without thinking, she stepped into her sister's arms, holding her tightly as both of them cried in each other's shoulders. Keanu watched them quietly, his own eyes softening with emotion. He knew how much this moment meant. He knew the pain Sandra carried from her past, pain she never talked about fully. He knew this reunion was more than forgiveness. It was a homecoming of two hearts that had been lost from each other for too long. When Sandra finally pulled away, still holding her sister's hands, she turned to Lily with a warm, trembling smile. "And you," she whispered, kneeling again, "I want to know everything about you, your favorite colors, your dreams, your stories, everything." Lily smiled, shy but glowing. "My favorite color is blue," she said softly, "and I like drawing, and I always wanted to meet you." Sandra laughed through her tears. "Then I'm happy you're here." Her sister wiped her cheeks and looked at Sandra with hesitant uncertainty. "Can we start over?" she asked. "Slowly, carefully, whatever you're comfortable with." Sandra looked at Keanu for a moment, not for permission, but for anchoring. He gave her a soft, encouraging nod, his eyes full of quiet support. Sandra turned back to her sister and whispered, "Yes, we can start over." The three of them stood together, holding on to one another as though afraid the moment might disappear. Sandra felt Keanu come closer, placing a gentle hand on her back. She leaned into him slightly, not out of weakness, but because she finally allowed herself to feel supported. Her sister glanced at Keanu, offering him a small smile. "Thank you for staying with her," she said softly. Keanu returned a warm, humble nod. "She's someone worth standing by," he replied quietly. Sandra turned to him, her eyes softening in a way she hadn't allowed herself to express before. "You never left my side tonight," she whispered, "even when I didn't know how to stand." Keanu looked into her eyes, his voice low and sincere. "You've been holding other people up your whole life, Sandra. Someone needed to hold you too." Her heart swelled, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his words. She inhaled slowly, feeling something shift between them, something gentle, honest, and deeply human. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by healing, forgiveness, and a fragile but powerful new beginning. The premiere that began with bright lights and unanswered questions ended with something far more meaningful. Truth, connection, and a love, whether romantic or simply spiritual, that had been waiting to bloom in the quiet spaces between them. And as Sandra stepped outside with Keanu beside her, her sister on one side and Lily holding her hand, she realized something profound. The night hadn't been about the movie or the cameras or the fame. It had been about remembering who she was, what she needed, and who she was brave enough to face again. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt whole. The story ends with healed hearts, new beginnings, and the soft, steady truth Sandra finally understood. Sometimes the voice that shakes you is the one that brings you home.